first ever stunning admission from a woman who accused Duke University lacrosse players of raping her nearly 20 years ago. The story was a national firestorm. She now says she lied about the encounter. Crystal Mangum first made the claims back in 2006, saying 3 members of the school's lacrosse team raped her after she had been hired to dance at a house party the team was throwing.
Some betrayals are so profound, they defy comprehension. Before we pull back the curtain on these haunting investigations, please be advised, this content is deeply disturbing. If you're new, subscribe to The Invisible Evidence. To our loyal community, thank you for spreading truth. Where are you watching from? So let's start our episode. Case 1. The investigation hinged on a fundamental discrepancy: the state of the scene versus the testimony provided. Detectives tasked with the inquiry focused on the physical environment of the apartment. They documented the layout, looking for indicators of a struggle that would corroborate a self-defense claim. The findings were inconsistent with the narrative offered by the occupant. Forensic technicians conducted a sweep for biological markers and peripheral evidence, aiming to reconstruct the sequence of events. The institutional context of the 2006 Duke University lacrosse matter cast a long shadow over the proceedings. During that prior event, investigators had navigated a landscape of conflicting public sentiment and intense media scrutiny, which eventually led to the collapse of the initial accusations. By 2011, law enforcement officials were acutely aware of the necessity for clinical precision. They were mandated to bypass the public persona and focus solely on the sequence of forensic markers to establish the timeline of the altercation. Interviews conducted with neighbors indicated a pattern of recurring disputes at the residence. When investigators compared these accounts with the statements given on the night of the incident, the focus shifted from a singular, isolated event to an environment defined by prolonged instability. The absence of defensive injuries on the accused raised critical questions regarding the nature of the confrontation. This case serves as a point of advocacy for internal review processes within law enforcement. It highlights the importance of relying upon objective data sets, such as blood spatter analysis and weapon trajectory, over the subjective accounts that often define domestic interactions. By prioritizing forensic methodology, the justice system can ensure that evaluations remain grounded in facts rather than influenced by the external visibility or the historical notoriety of those involved in the judicial process. Case 2. In 2009, investigators uncovered a breach of trust within a private residence that revealed significant vulnerabilities in unregulated home care arrangements. Walter Sartori, a retired scientist, had employed Willa Glendor Blank as a housekeeper. Over time, Blank and her son, Lewis Wilkinson, recognized an opportunity to access Sartori's financial assets by exploiting his declining mental health. The investigation determined that the motive was rooted in financial gain. Blank invited Sartori to her property under the pretense of a business discussion. Once inside, he was restrained. Forensic evidence later indicated that his period of confinement contributed to his eventual passing. Following the event, Blank and Wilkinson attempted to conceal their involvement by transporting Sartori's remains to a remote area and initiating a fire, a method intended to destroy physical markers. This case highlights a systemic failure regarding the lack of oversight for private caregivers. Because these arrangements often occur outside of institutional frameworks, they lack the rigorous vetting and financial monitoring required to protect vulnerable individuals. The subsequent legal proceedings underscored that trust, without professional verification and third-party oversight, can be a major liability. To prevent similar occurrences, communities must prioritize background screenings and financial safeguards for all private care providers, ensuring that those in positions of influence are held to professional standards of accountability. Case 3. In September 2013, law enforcement in Santa Ana, California, responded to a critical situation at a federal parking structure. Officers encountered 42-year-old Marilyn Edge, who was positioned on the ledge. During the negotiation, Edge made statements regarding her 2 children, Jalen and Faith. These comments directed officers to a nearby hotel, where investigators discovered the children. The subsequent investigation revealed that this event followed a protracted and contentious custody battle involving Edge and her former spouse, David Edge. The court had recently mandated that custody be transferred, a development that acted as the primary stressor in this case. Forensics confirmed that the children had been given a lethal combination of substances hours before the police arrival. In her formal statement to detectives, Edge admitted to planning the event in direct response to the court's decision. This incident exposes a systemic failure within the family law and custodial court systems. It highlights a critical inability to identify high-risk psychological profiles during high-conflict litigation. When the court manages custody transitions, the absence of mandatory mental health evaluations can leave vulnerable parties without the necessary oversight. To prevent such outcomes, legal systems must integrate proactive psychological screenings and robust support mechanisms for families navigating intense custodial disputes. Ensuring the safety of children remains the absolute priority. Case 4. In July 2004, authorities in Arlington, Texas, received a report regarding the passing of 9-year-old Devontae Williams. Upon arrival at the residence shared by Lisa Coleman and the victim's mother, Marcella Williams, investigators were met with evidence of profound neglect. The medical examiner's findings revealed that the child's body showed signs of severe, chronic malnutrition and multiple previous fractures, indicating that the condition was the result of a long-term, methodical process rather than an isolated incident. The investigation identified Lisa Coleman as an active participant in the concealment and restriction of the victim. Detectives determined that Coleman functioned as an enforcer, isolating the child from school and withholding food as a punitive measure. This confinement allowed the perpetrators to evade public observation for an extended period. The case demonstrates a systemic failure in school and welfare oversight protocols. Despite the child's mandatory age for schooling, there was a complete breakdown in the mechanism intended to track his absence and ensure his safety. This tragedy advocates for legislative reform, specifically the implementation of stricter school attendance tracking and more rigorous, mandatory home welfare checks for vulnerable youth. Ensuring that children do not disappear from public view is a critical step in preventing the escalation of domestic neglect. Case 5. In January 2014, authorities in Germantown, Maryland, were summoned to a townhouse following reports of a violent domestic disturbance. Upon arrival, officers encountered a scene involving Zackie Latrice Avery and her associate, Manifa Sanford. The investigation confirmed that Avery's 2 youngest children, DEA and Zaylin, had been subjected to a fatal, ritualized act driven by a shared, extreme belief system. Forensic examination and subsequent interviews revealed that Avery and Sanford had been operating under the conviction that the children were experiencing an external spiritual influence. This delusion had been intensifying over several weeks. When detectives analyzed the timeline of events, they found that the behaviors exhibited by the 2 women had become increasingly erratic, yet these indicators remained unaddressed by the surrounding community. The case highlights a significant systemic failure regarding the detection of non-normative, high-risk psychiatric episodes. While the women were later found to be disconnected from reality, the legal system had to evaluate how their shared, extreme belief system facilitated their actions. This incident underscores the urgent need for community-level education on identifying warning signs associated with severe behavioral changes. Providing the public with the tools to report high-risk, religiously motivated delusions is essential to ensuring that psychiatric crises are met with professional intervention before they result in irreparable harm. Case 6. In September 2006, authorities in East St. Louis launched an investigation into the disappearances of Janila Tunstall and her 3 young children, Demond, Ivan, and Janila. The inquiry identified Tiffany Hall, a childhood friend of Tunstall, as the primary person of interest. Forensic scene reconstruction, supported by a digital trail of communication and proximity data, eventually linked Hall to the residence during the time frame of the disappearances. Investigators later recovered the victims from storage units within Hall's apartment complex. This tragedy exposes the systemic risk inherent in informal childcare arrangements, where social trust is often substituted for professional vetting. Hall utilized her long-standing relationship with Tunstall to gain access, exploiting that intimacy to bypass safety boundaries. This case underscores the necessity of maintaining professional standards for childcare regardless of personal history. Communities must promote awareness regarding the importance of formal verification and structured safety protocols, even within trusted social circles. Case 7. In May 1999, Denver authorities initiated a search for Malika Tmu Griffin following the shooting of her neighbor, Jason Patrick Horsley. The investigation established that the incident stemmed from a prolonged dispute, during which Griffin had expressed intense animosity toward Horsley. Detectives recovered a journal from her residence containing detailed plans and motivations, which confirmed the act was premeditated. Following the event, Griffin vanished, initiating a nationwide manhunt that lasted 6 years. The investigative focus shifted to tracking her through a series of aliases and temporary employment records across multiple states. This methodology highlighted the challenges of identifying individuals who intentionally withdraw from societal monitoring. The search concluded in 2005 when U.S. Marshals located her at a business in El Cajon, California. This case serves as a point of advocacy for the necessity of formal conflict resolution structures in residential settings. The escalation from a neighbor-to-neighbor disagreement to a lethal act reflects a systemic failure to provide resources for de-escalating personal disputes. It underscores the importance of public safety outreach in residential neighborhoods. To prevent similar tragedies, communities should promote professional mediation resources, ensuring that interpersonal conflicts are addressed before they reach a violent impasse. Case 8. In May 1983, a traffic stop in Jacksonville, Florida, escalated into a lethal encounter when Andrea Hicks Jackson fired upon Officer Gary Beville. The subsequent investigation centered on a forensic reconstruction of the scene, which proved critical in testing Jackson's defense. While she maintained that the shooting was a result of sudden panic, an analysis of ballistic trajectory and tactical positioning demonstrated that the shot was delivered with deliberate intent. The evidence refuting her claim of self-preservation was central to the prosecution's case. The systemic context of this incident lies in Jackson's history of involvement with law enforcement prior to this event. Despite previous interactions with the juvenile and criminal justice systems, the provided interventions failed to address the behavioral trajectory that led to such a violent escalation. This highlights a clear failure in the efficacy of earlier rehabilitation efforts to divert high-risk youth from a path of sustained criminal activity. This case serves as a point of advocacy for the reform of recidivism programs for youth. It illustrates the necessity of evidence-based intervention strategies that prioritize effective long-term behavioral changes. To prevent similar cycles of violence, the justice system must evaluate why current models fail to redirect repeat offenders, ensuring that reform programs are equipped to provide the oversight and redirection required for public safety. Case 9. In May 2012, emergency services in Port St. John, Florida, responded to a residence following a series of events that resulted in the deaths of Pebbles, Joel, Jazzy, and Javon Johnson. Investigators conducted a digital forensic analysis of communications sent by their mother, Tanya Thomas, shortly before the incident. These records revealed a progression of intent that had been shared with acquaintances, providing a grim timeline of the decision-making process. The analysis confirmed the event was a deliberate act rather than a sudden behavioral break. The case illustrates the systemic failure to support at-risk families who remain invisible within small suburban communities. Thomas had been struggling with significant emotional and financial instability, yet there were no formal interventions recorded prior to the event. This lack of oversight demonstrates the limitations of community networks in identifying households in acute crisis. The tragedy advocates for a critical expansion of accessible, crisis-focused mental health resources specifically for parents. It highlights the necessity of destigmatizing the search for support and integrating proactive mental health outreach within community infrastructure. By ensuring that parents in crisis have clear, anonymous, and immediate pathways to professional intervention, the social system can better protect children and prevent the irreversible consequences of untreated maternal psychological distress. Case 10. In July 1997, 71-year-old retired college professor Dorothy Booth was found at her home in Lancaster, Texas. The investigation initially faced challenges due to a lack of immediate witnesses. However, the subsequent forensic analysis proved pivotal. Investigators utilized DNA evidence collected from the scene, which, when entered into the state database, provided a direct match to Kimberly McCarthy. Further testing linked McCarthy's DNA to two previously unsolved cold cases involving the deaths of elderly women in 1988 and 1991. McCarthy's method involved befriending isolated residents to gain access to their homes, a strategy that allowed her to operate without triggering suspicion. This highlights a systemic failure to protect vulnerable seniors who lack consistent community oversight. This case reinforces the need for robust wellness visit networks. By strengthening senior care programs and fostering interagency monitoring, communities can better support isolated elderly residents and detect predatory behavior early. Case 11. In October 2017, authorities in Atlanta, Georgia, were called to an apartment where the lives of Jakarta and Keont Pen were lost. The initial investigation into the mother, Lamora Williams, involved extensive scrutiny of her provided account of the event. Williams claimed she had left the children in the care of a sitter, yet investigators utilized digital forensic evidence, including cell tower logs, device activity, and lack of visual evidence from security systems, to effectively disprove her alibi. This data established that the children were alone with her during the critical window. The subsequent inquiry into this matter revealed deep-seated systemic failures within Georgia's Child Protective Services. It was documented that the agency had been aware of the family's high-risk status for a significant period, but massive caseload failures prevented effective monitoring. Caseworkers were overwhelmed, and essential follow-up procedures were neglected, leaving the children in a situation that demanded immediate intervention. This case serves as a point of advocacy for the necessity of capped caseloads for child welfare workers. It highlights that without manageable workloads and stringent agency oversight, protective services cannot fulfill their mandate. To prevent such tragedies, it is imperative that child welfare agencies are properly funded and held to strict accountability standards, ensuring that high-risk families receive the consistent, professional oversight necessary to safeguard the well-being of every child. In 2011, authorities in Philadelphia uncovered one of the most extensive human exploitation rings in recent history, directed by Linda and Weston. For over a decade, Weston operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that targeted vulnerable adults, many of whom suffered from cognitive impairments or developmental disabilities. By assuming the legal role of representative payee, a position authorized by the Social Security Administration to manage benefits for those unable to do so themselves, Weston gained complete control over her victims' lives. The investigation revealed that Weston used the system's own structure to facilitate her crimes. She kidnapped victims, held them in confined conditions, and systematically confiscated their government benefit checks. To maintain the illusion of legitimacy, she relocated victims across multiple states, exploiting gaps in interagency communication that allowed her to avoid local welfare checks. The forensic audit of the Social Security Representative Payee program following her arrest highlighted a terrifying reality. The very government mechanism designed to protect the disabled had been repurposed as a tool for their systematic imprisonment and financial exploitation. The systemic failure here was twofold: the lack of physical verification for representative payees and the inability of fraud detection algorithms to identify when benefits were being diverted from a victim's primary care. Weston effectively manipulated the system by creating a false record of residential stability, ensuring that government oversight remained purely administrative rather than clinical. This case serves as a vital mandate for legislative reform. It highlights the urgent necessity for the Social Security Administration to implement mandatory, in-person verification protocols for all representative payees. Furthermore, it advocates for an integrated, national interagency fraud reporting system that bridges the gap between social service payments and local law enforcement. Ensuring the safety of the disabled requires more than just financial auditing. It necessitates a proactive, transparent framework that holds those in positions of fiduciary trust to the highest standards of accountability. These cases underscore the critical importance of systemic vigilance and the necessity of objective forensic inquiry. By analyzing these instances of failure, we hope to foster a broader discussion on the policy reforms and community safeguards essential for protecting the vulnerable. Accountability and proactive oversight remain the primary tools for preventing similar tragedies. We appreciate your engagement with this investigative series and your commitment to understanding the complexities of the justice system. For more fact-driven reports and deep dives into these topics, subscribe to The Invisible Evidence. Thank you for watching and for your continued support in seeking the truth.